Hey friends, and welcome back to Trying to with Leah. If you're new here, this channel is all about making a daily choice to grow into a better person through healing, perspective shifts, and self-love so that we can show up for others just as much as we show up for ourselves. If that sounds like something you're interested in, I'm hoping that you're going to find a great home here. Today, we're going to talk about accountability. And I know that isn't exactly a fun word. Most of us hear it and we immediately think about blame or somebody coming in and pointing out everything that we've done wrong. But I've actually come to believe that taking accountability is one of the most freeing things that you can possibly learn to do. Because every time that you're taking responsibility for something that's actually within your control, you're taking a little bit of your power back. I don't think that anyone intentionally grows up avoiding taking accountability, but as humans, we naturally find ways to protect ourselves. And sometimes that looks like making excuses or blaming other people, or maybe even avoiding situations altogether. And I think that most of the time we aren't even actually aware that we're even doing it. When I think about accountability, the first thing that really comes to my mind is just owning up to your mistakes. And I think that's definitely part of it. But what I've learned is that life is going to hand every single one of us incredible moments and devastating moments. And those moments are unavoidable. But the fastest and healthiest way to move forward from those moments is to take accountability, even when at first glance it doesn't really seem like there's any accountability to take. I've talked before about leaving the long-term care field. And at the time, it was really devastating for me because I really spent years working to get where I was. And I genuinely loved taking care of those patients. And for a while, I blamed the company and my boss and the circumstances. And honestly, some of those circumstances were really unfair. But taking accountability doesn't mean pretending other people didn't hurt me. And it also doesn't mean that I have to believe that everything was my fault either. But it does mean that I have to refuse to let those other people and those circumstances dictate my life. And looking back on it now, I really do see my part in it because I was burnout and emotionally exhausted. I was overextending myself and trying to give 110%. And for years, I thought that that pressure was coming from everybody around me, but honestly, it came from me. I had become my own toughest boss and my own harshest critic. And I also had to admit something difficult because as much as I felt forced out of my career at that point, I also gave up. Could I have fought harder? Probably. Yeah. Could I have stayed longer? Yeah, probably. Sure. But hindsight shows you something beautiful because if I hadn't left when I did, I wouldn't have gone into medical staffing, which wouldn't have led to my eBay business and this channel and the life that I have now. I wouldn't have found the peace that I have now. And because I can see where that journey led me, I actually was led to forgiveness. I was able to forgive the company and the boss and myself. And that's not because what happened was okay, because it wasn't, but it pushed me exactly where I needed to go. So instead of carrying bitterness towards the situation, I actually found gratitude unexpectedly. So whenever something difficult happens now, I ask myself the question, what's actually in my control? Because we can't control other people's choices or opinions or behaviors, and we can't control unexpected circumstances, but we do control our own choices and our own reactions. And sometimes when we're operating from fear or stress or anger or hurt, that doesn't really feel true. It doesn't feel like we're in control. But one of the best changes that I've ever made was learning just to pause and distance myself from that emotion. So instead of reacting immediately, I just ask myself, how do I actually want to respond here? And that pause changes a lot because the moment you stop reacting automatically, you can start responding intentionally. And that's where your actual power is. One of the things that I absolutely love most about life is that every single day is another opportunity to choose differently, regardless of what happened yesterday and what choices you made then. Because that actually means that none of us are stuck. We have habits, we have patterns, we have wounds and things that we need to work on. But every single day gives us another chance to unstick ourselves and respond differently, to think of love differently, and to grow and to live with intention. And that intention can just simply be to be a little bit better than you were yesterday. A huge part of taking accountability is just asking yourself in the situation, what part of this actually belongs to me? Because that's the part that you have power over and you can change that part. But while you're asking yourself those questions, please don't forget to give yourself compassion. Because when you honestly look at your mistakes, it's easy to become angry with yourself. I did that for years. I'd fall back into an old habit and then I would get frustrated. And then I would get frustrated at myself for being frustrated, which is kind of ridiculous, but it's also really sad. I was trying so hard to become a kinder person and I was forgetting to be kind to myself. But growth is not supposed to be punishment. It's supposed to be an act of love. So take accountability, but don't weaponize it against yourself. Use it as a tool, how it's supposed to be used. One thing that helped me more than probably almost anything is remembering who I was before life convinced me that I had to be somebody else. Before life jaded me and before all of these responsibilities piled up, at my core, I was kind and I was caring and I was loyal and I really wanted to help people. And when I really think about it, that's still who I am. Those parts of me never disappeared. They were just kind of buried under all of the people pleasing and the overthinking. But so much of my growth wasn't actually about becoming somebody new. It was just about uncovering who I already was and finding my way back to myself. I think the hardest thing that I've ever taken accountability for was my own thoughts. Because for years, I believed that it was life that was making me stressed. I thought it was work or other people or the circumstances that I was in. And those things absolutely contributed to that stress. But eventually I realized something kind of uncomfortable. And that was that a lot of my suffering that was happening in my head was because of me. Because I was replaying conversations and imagining worst case scenarios and putting all of this enormous pressure on myself, and I had been doing it for years without even noticing. But taking accountability meant admitting that I had created a lot of that distress myself, not intentionally, of course, but it was really the only way I knew how to live at the time. But once I became aware of that, everything changed because awareness gives you a choice. People have asked me what I mean when I say I've found peace. And for me, peace is stillness. It's not allowing worry and fear and stress and doubt to become the loudest voice in my head. Now I wake up and stress is not the first thing that I think about. It's usually gratitude or possibility for the day, because every anxious thought that you interrupt and every fear that you refuse to feed and every intentional choice that you make, you are practicing peace, one choice at a time. I really believe that we all have more power than we realize. Every day we're creating an environment inside of our own minds, and that environment can be peaceful or chaotic. You can choose gratitude or resentment. You can choose hope or hopelessness. And that's the real power of accountability because it isn't about carrying the weight of your past. It's about knowing when to let go of what you don't need to carry and start picking up the tools that you need to build your future. So this week's challenge is going to be pretty simple. The next time something frustrates you, go ahead and pause. Before you start thinking about what everybody else did, ask yourself, what part of this belongs to me? Maybe the answer is literally almost nothing. Maybe it's a lot, but either way, that's where your actual power is, I also want you to think about where you've compromised on what you're willing to tolerate from other people. Where have you been saying yes when you really wanted to say no? especially if you are a recovering people pleaser like I was, because every unnecessary yes usually comes at the expense of yourself. And finally, don't forget to give yourself compassion. Accountability without compassion becomes shame, and compassion without accountability becomes avoidance. So you need both. I truly wish you guys all the very best. So, thank you so much for being here with me this week. Thank you for showing up for yourselves as well, because that's the hardest part. I know that this work is not easy, but I also know it's so worth it. So, every intentional choice that you make is another step towards becoming the person that you've always wanted to be. And life really does get better when you try. So, keep trying, and I'll see you guys next time.